Hey guys, we're working on a Honda Civic 1.6 liter single overhead cam. We put these in quite a few vehicles. Alright, we have a high idle situation. It's like, so I knew I was getting too much air. I started checking all the vacuum lines, checking for leaks, looked good. Started spraying some carb cleaner around where it was running. And as soon as I sprayed right down here, where the intake meets the head, then it changed the idle. So I knew that there's an intake leak on the intake gasket there. So now we're replacing the intake manifold gasket because it's letting air in, causing a high idle situation. I guess it's time to get down to it and get her all fixed up, right? I'm going to start off with just taking our plastic intake tube off here. We got a 5.5 millimeter on this hose clamp because the Phillips part of it is rotted out. We got quite a few things to take apart. It's on there pretty tight. We got a wiring harness here. Unclip that, take that off. A little hose clamp there. Top of the cam cover. And we've got to take off that. Get this wiring harness off from the throttle body. And it's got this little metal pipe here. So we'll get those clamps loosened up. Just trying to get everything out of the way so we can take this intake off. See if we can get these to spin. There we go. Takes a little effort to crack them free sometimes. And you're better off if you can make them spin. A little bit of coolant inside of that one. That's the coolant line that goes to the idle air control valve. There's that. We got another one right here. That one's not going to come off of there, it's just going to keep on spinning. We'll just pop this guy off of here. Move it out of the way. I'd like to just take it off, but this guy is not coming out of there. There it goes. Now we can set that to the side. We gotta get our wiring harnesses off. Throttle position sensor, wiring harness, idle air control valve wiring harness. All these are coming off easy. And we've got a hose underneath here. Just go into the purge. So that's gonna have to come off. We've got a big bracket on the bottom of the intake manifold that kind of like stabilizes it, holds it. So we're gonna have to get behind here to get those bolts off, like a 12, 13 mil, something like that. And we've got to depressurize our fuel line, get our fuel line off of here. And of course we got some wires connecting the fuel injectors. Those are gonna have to go. We'll take this throttle cable off. So this is actually pretty easy. You just press the throttle down and press out on this pin. And we need some slack first. Probably be easier if we take it out of this slot to get that cable off. Grab a wrench. I want it to go right back in the same position it was. Only move this one bolt back. There we go. Now we got this cable out of here. That gives us a lot more slack to get this out of the throttle body. Bada boom. Now that cable's out of the throttle body. We got a hose connected here. We'll get that hose clamp pressed up and spin this hose around to get it broke free. There we go. That's out of the way. We had this purge hose we gotta get to take it off from the purge canister. Careful not to break your plastic nipple off there. There we go. Most of the hoses and stuff are off now. I think next I'll get down here and get this bracket off from the intake and the wiring off the fuel injectors. See if we can get a look down here. See that bracket holds the intake up, those two bolts. And then of course we're mounted to the head with some nuts here. 1, 2, 3, 4, one on the side. I believe there's one in the very middle, which is going to be the tricky one to get to. I'll get a little work done and come back to it. All right guys, now we're getting down to business. Took this return fuel line off here. We had a little bracket here, which was on this hose, 10 millimeter to come off. Wiring harness for the fuel injectors is off. It's got these two little tabs right here and here. And the plastic cover comes off. And you gotta take the wiring harness off of here in the 4 fuel injectors. That gets out of the way. Perfect. Got a hose off of there. I think I showed that. There's another hose right here that just goes on underneath the manifold right there on the tip of my finger. You can't barely see it. Just pops right off. Over on this side, we had a, I believe it was 17 millimeter on the fuel rail. There's 2 washers. I recommend replacing those. They're right there. And we had a coolant pipe right here. I just blocked it off with a spare plug I had so I didn't lose coolant. Same story for this little coolant hose. That little coolant hose goes to the bottom of the idle air control valve down here. Right there, both of these do. They both have coolant in them. So we got those off. We got our 12 millimeter bolts off from right there. The bracket. And we might have to take that whole bracket off, which means I'll probably lift it up in the air to get the bolt off of the bracket where it mounts to the engine down there. Might have to take that off, we'll see. But yeah, pretty much everything's off of the intake. Now we just got to worry about all our nuts. And you can see the bottom one here on this side and over on that side. And like I said, I'm pretty sure there's one right in the middle. That's going to be the tough one to get to. The rest of these we can get to with wrenches and whatnot. So let's start taking those off. Alright guys, we got that last nut off. This is the combination that I used to get it off. Just a bunch of little swivelies, you know. That's a little wobble extender. Probably didn't need that much, but you know, it is what it is. Alright, get up underneath the vehicle, and above your oil filter here, there's a little vacuum hose. That's the one that went through the center of the intake. I just pulled it right down there, and then you can get your finger on the nut up here. I can see it, but it's hard to with the camera. I'll get the camera up in there, the stud. It's not focusing. There we go. Right behind that oil filter is your nut, so you can get it from here. Now we have to take the bracket. Try to get the camera up in there. Those two bolts should be 12 millimeter as well. That's the bracket that's holding the intake in right now. Once I take that bracket off, it should be totally loose because those are studs, so the intake has to go backwards, and that bracket doesn't allow it to go backwards. So we're going to take that bracket off. All right, here we go. I pulled the intake off, just slid it backwards. You can see how it like slides off of those studs. And we got plenty of room to pull our intake out now, and we're gonna clean up our mating surfaces, get this old gasket out of here, clean up the intake, clean up the head, prep it for reinstallation. All right, we got our intake back on there. Use a little RTV on that gasket. So about the toughest part of this job is to get that middle nut on underneath this vacuum hose. Get it threaded back on there and tightened from the underneath. That's tough. Whew. But now it's time to connect everything. I fed my hose right back through there, through the middle. This hose is collapsed, so I'm gonna replace that section. And all right, so there's gonna be a torque sequence and torque spec on those intake manifold nuts. You're gonna wanna look that up. And I hooked up my vacuum hose right here, the one that goes down right underneath there, hooked up that vacuum hose. It is time to put everything back together, all the hoses and whatnot. So hang out with me for a little bit. We'll get this all put back together. So we just got to figure out which order we want to do things in. Pretty much reverse order, I would say, because there's some things you can't get to until you take another thing off. So I got to try to remember what order I took everything off in. We've got a 10 millimeter bolt right here that holds down a hold down bracket. So we'll get that guy put in there. Find my 10 mil. Get her started. And that's gonna go to return fuel line. It's gonna hold that return fuel line in there. This guy goes right here. All right, return fuel line has this little grommet that it slips into. Does not want to go back on there. The hose. So we'll get our pliers out. on, buddy. It's going. Don't know why it wants to be so difficult, but there we go. We put our clamp back on. Bada boom. Get this little grommet. Pop that in. Sweet. Trying to remember if there was anything right here on the fuel injectors to put on. There is a hose right here. We can get to that whenever. I think we're good to put the wiring back on. We'll start with, actually I don't want to put this back on until I replace this hose. I'm going to snip it and put a hose on. So we'll wait on that. We can put that on any time. One thing I want to do first is this little coolant line that goes to the idle air control valve. We want to get that on before anything. There we go. And I got this little hose clamp that I had to back out so that my socket would get on this last bottom nut here. So all I had to do was, I didn't have to take the hose off to get my socket on it, just the metal clamp, it was in the way. There we go. That's back on. Now this little guy that goes to the little coolant line, back on. And now we got our bigger coolant hose, that one that I capped off earlier. We're gonna want to put that guy back on now. That one was a little bit of a pain to get off. I had to really work it. Went back on easy enough. It's really nice having these bent pliers for some of these locations. Yeah, and I had a hard time getting this clamp off too. There we go. Slid over there. All right. What else we got here? Time for fuel line, maybe? Could be. This hose is the one that went over there. And it was never connected to its little hold down. Somebody's taken some of this stuff apart before. But we can get the clamp back on there. Bada boom. Most of our stuff. Now, which way does this fuel line feed around? Up underneath or up over? Up over this heater hose. And inside of here. Yeah, just like that. And it hooks into its little groove. Got our little smush washers to put on there. There'll be a torque spec on this as well. Let's get her tightened down a bit of the ways. Got our nut on the end. Uh, 17mm wrench. That's pretty tight. All right, we've got this little hose that goes to the purge valve that runs underneath the intake and it goes up to here, this little solenoid. We'll pop that guy on there. And pliers. Boom. And cool. It's gonna almost do it, guys. There's that. I'll get this hose that's collapsed fixed all up. And we'll clip this plastic piece back in its two little grooves here. But before I clip it in, I gotta get the wiring harness to this on there, and put the 4 fuel injectors in order, and then clip it onto its little clip after I replace that hose. And yeah, the 3 hoses we have left here go to the plastic intake tube, the 3 hoses we have left. And we gotta hook up our idle air control valve, throttle position sensor, and everything. We got 3 wiring harnesses here to hook up. I think there's 1 on the plastic intake tube. And hopefully I'm not forgetting anything, but we lost a little bit of coolant, so we'll run it, check the coolant, top it off. And yeah, that'll about do it, guys. New intake manifold gasket. You know, probably about a 3-hour job. Depends on how fast you feel like working. I was moving pretty slow. Like I said, that bottom bolt's the only pain on this job. It's just time consuming, taking everything off, remembering where everything goes. Thanks for watching. Drop a sub, drop a like if this video helped you. Appreciate it.